So here today we have our football correspondent, David Ornstein, and Manchester United writer, Anka as well. David, let's start with you. Massive story literally just dropped on The Athletic. Manuel Ugarte is travelling today for his Manchester United medical ahead of a €60 million transfer from PSG. We know this is a player that Manchester United have been chasing for a while, and they've been exit, so perhaps this has opened the door for Ugarte. Could you just tell us a little bit more about this deal, please?
This is the beauty and the curse of recording a podcast in transfer deadline week, that anything can change. It's been to our benefit so far, but that may alter during the course of this next half hour or so. Manchester United had Manuel Ugarte very high on their list of targets for this summer transfer window. It was reported quite early on that they were interested. They have conducted what appear to be some pretty patient negotiations, because Paris Saint-Germain were looking for around the fee that they paid for him, which was €60 million from Sporting Lisbon a year ago. It seemed at various points like it was going to happen, at others like it might not. Then it could depend on potential outgoings such as Scott McTominay, and of course that is still in the mix. Manchester United naturally started to look at alternative options in case they had to move away from Ugarte, in case Paris Saint-Germain refused to come down in their asking price. And there was said to be significant interest from elsewhere in his signature, so perhaps that would have emboldened PSG to stand firm. However, I think the will of the player was to join Manchester United, and that helped a lot. Manchester United also did get the fee down in the end, which satisfied their ambitions, and you could say their skill in the dialogue between the two clubs and with the intermediaries as well. George Mendes, somebody they know very well from the negotiation for Lenny Yoro most recently. And now an agreement has been reached in the hours ahead of us recording this, and it is for €50 million plus €10 million in potential add-ons related to performance and success. So it could get up to the 60 that PSG wanted, but they were initially demanding 60 as the fixed fee. So Manchester United will see that as something of a victory for a 23-year-old Uruguay international who we know is of high quality. We know was wanted by so many clubs before he joined PSG, including Chelsea, who came very close to landing him. It hasn't been the best year, but he's exactly the position that Manchester United were looking for in that six, the position that many clubs are seeking. And they're getting him over to the UK. He'll undergo a medical, and then all being well, finalise the contract to join Manchester United on a permanent basis, long term. And we'll see in these coming minutes and hours whether there's a resolution to the Scott McTominay situation as well, because I revealed exclusively on The Athletic that Manchester United had an agreement on Sunday with Napoli for a fee in the region of €30 million. And it was then all a case of every party involved, two clubs and player and representatives, being satisfied on the personal terms. And that was the final step. As we speak, I'm hearing that it is moving in the right direction, but it's not done yet. I think Scott McTominay is at Carrington, Manchester United's training ground, as we speak, to continue until told otherwise. But I think that otherwise might be on the horizon fairly soon. And the Ugarte-McTominay deals in recent days have been sort of moving in parallel. So with Ugarte coming towards a conclusion, I suspect McTominay is too. It's not done yet, though. It's important to say that. It's a slight caveat. And none of these situations are completely finalised until the ink is dry, and that shirt is being held up for the cameras.
I love that. Carl, as David's just said, Ugarte, a man that's in demand for many clubs across Europe. But I've been listening to Talk of the Devils, mate. He's a man you're not sure is the right fit for Manchester United. Explain yourself.
I do have hesitations there, and this is possibly personal preference over anything. So Ugarte, noteworthy thing about Ugarte is he is a tackling phenomenon. He's a man who enjoys hunting. If you are on the opposition team and you have the ball at your feet and Ugarte sees you, he is going to chase you, and he's not going to stop until he wins that ball. And for his first few months at PSG. That was fantastic. He was a cult hero and looking like a cult hero among the PSG ultras because of the way he is relentless. He did an interview. Peter Rutzler showed me the quotes where he said, "When we have the ball, it's a match, but when we don't have the ball, it's a fight." And he is one that you end up describing as a warrior. Now, that thing I just described there, you have the ball and Ugarte is chasing you, more at the knife edge of Ligue 1 and the knife edge of Champions League football, you, AO, would exploit that. So you would have the ball at your feet and go, oh, okay, Ugarte's chased me. I'm just going to hold on to this ball until the last minute and then play a 1-2. And Ugarte's voided some space in central midfield and I'm just going to flood the space. Notably, there was a game between AC Milan and PSG in the Champions League last season, and Ruben Loftus-Cheek and other AC Milan players just had fun with that. Ugarte was absolutely swamped by being the defensive player in a midfield three that was a little bit lightweight, and he made 3 successful tackles out of 15. And Ugarte is a man that wants to make tackles in high volume, but if that doesn't come off for some reason, and sometimes it doesn't come off, he doesn't have he has a wide menu of tackles. He doesn't have 3 or 4 favourite tackles, shall we say. So that means his success percentage can oscillate up and down. And one big thing from his time at PSG was the manager was Luis Enrique. Luis Enrique is a manager who's worked with Rodri as his defensive midfielder. He's worked with Sergio Busquets as his defensive midfielder. He wants very particular things from his defensive midfielder. And Ugarte, while he hoovers up ground and makes tackles, he's not one to make progressive passes. He's not one to really offer too much attacking in the final third. So Luis Enrique dropped him entirely for PSG's run through that Champions League because he wanted something else. He wanted, Warren, Zaire Emery. He wanted Vitinha. He wanted Fabian Ruiz. So my hesitations around Ugarte as a number 6 is, yes, good. That man's going to make loads of tackles and replace the pressing and counter-pressing energy United lost for large parts of last season when Casemiro was injured or didn't look great. However, when you look at some of the key problems of Manchester United, and for me, those are ball progression and strength out wide, Ugarte doesn't necessarily fix that. Ugarte, to me, reads as a doubling down or a restoration of the style of play that Manchester United played in the 22-23 season, Ten Hag's first season, which was good, of course. They won the League Cup. They finished 3rd. However, they did also have a bad record away from home. And I think the way Ugarte wants to play means some of those worries don't go away yet. If Ugarte is someone to come in this season to sort of be the long-term successor to Casemiro, I have no problems with that, providing Ornstein next summer starts talking to me about other midfielders with huger price tags named to them, and it's talking to me about a huge bidding war between Manchester United and Liverpool for these individuals and things of the like.
United seem to be doing some good business. They're selling, and they're not paying over the odds for players. Anthony, I won't mention. But real talk, are you surprised or are you pleased by the progress Manchester United have made this summer in terms of selling and buying players?
I think this summer is best described as year 0 for Ineos rather than year 1. Dan Ashworth only came in at the start of July. Omar Barada also came in after a prolonged gardening leave and whatnot. So this is the phase where you describe new employees as just getting their feet underneath the table. So while some changes have been made and there have been some genuinely surprising moves, I for one did not expect Manchester United to sign Lenny Yoro. That is not the sort of signing Manchester United would have made under the regime of Ed Woodward and possibly John Murtough. They would sign Lenny Yoro when he's 28 and he's already won his 3 Champions Leagues at Real Madrid, not when he's 18 and on the way up. However, Manchester United are still signing Dutch players who have played at Ajax before on Erik ten Hag. So not too much has changed. Well, not too much has changed depending on what distance you want to look at things. One thing I do agree with that Ornstein said is the United are getting the price points right. And I've said this multiple times on Talk of Devils. The Manchester United team and squad, they needed to get taller. United need to improve their physical battling. They also need to improve the technical floor. And I think players like Joshua Zirkzee, Mazraoui, they absolutely improve United's ability to make the ball stick in difficult areas. If you compare someone like Mazraoui to a fullback like Aaron Wan-Bissaka, 2 very different kinds of fullback. And why Wan-Bissaka absolutely has his pluses, just the simple difference of when Onana is looking to play out from the back, having a player like Mazraoui over having a player like Wan-Bissaka changes United's play by 5-10 And I think having a player up front like Joshua Zirkzee, you compare him to Wout Weghorst. I know Ronald Koeman prefers to start Wout Weghorst in games, but Zirkzee's ability to make long passes stick and play round the corner and allow players like Garnacho to get in when it's not an offside touch should also help Manchester United play 5 yards further up the field. And also another thing that Ornstein's touched upon, wages as well. I think Manchester United are in the process of getting the wage bill down. So while this is not a finished summer transfer window, I'm sure there's many people listening to this going, what about the left back situation? What about the centre forward situation? The signs are promising. And what's also promising is the outgoings as well. There's been a point in time where more or less every April time you hear reports or whatnot about how Manchester United are preparing to let go 6 or 7 players, and I don't like using the term deadwood, but essentially remove fringe players from the squad. And what normally happens is players like, say, Eric Bailly have loans elsewhere. Whereas what we've seen this summer are players on the fringe of the first team, such as Facundo Pellistri, and they are being sold on a permanent basis towards teams like Panathinaikos as well. So the changeover is happening, and it's being a lot more permanent compared to previous seasons as well. This is just the start, and the window's not yet closed, but it looks as if United may be catching a fair wind.
It is the enigma that is Jaden Sancho. Reports have stated that he's made up with Erik ten Hag, but this is also a player that hasn't started the first 2 games for Manchester United this season. We were having this bit of a strange what if, because Raheem Sterling is also surplus to requirements at Chelsea. Could we see a potential swap for Raheem Sterling and Jaden Sancho either way? Because we have made a case for the fact that Jaden Sancho could potentially work at Chelsea, at the Athletic.
I mean, it's an eyebrow raiser, isn't it? I think you are correct in terms of Jaden Sancho. He's not featured in both matchday squads for Manchester United. He did feature in the Community Shield. He missed the penalty, unfortunately, at Wembley Stadium during the shootout, and he didn't feature in either matchday squad. He did travel to Brighton. Erik ten Hag did point that one out, which I thought was interesting. Now, I think one of the issues with Jaden Sancho, and I've said this before, he doesn't have elite athleticism. He's not blisteringly quick. And while he's good at ball progression and he's an exceptionally intelligent player in the final third, and I think this is always the thing about Sancho. He's not someone you talk about using pace and power. He's someone you talk about using nutmegs and guile and 1-2 passes. And I think that's always been an issue for him at Manchester United, is that within United's setup, and whenever they're playing this 4-2-3-1, I should say, he doesn't necessarily have a role. He's not a number 10 to the same degree as Bruno Fernandes, so that option is out on the right-hand side. Previously, it was Aaron Wan-Bissaka or Diogo Dalot at right back, and while both of those players offer some attacking quality, they're not a attacking right back in the same way that Hakimi was at Dortmund, or even Thomas Meunier was at Dortmund. So Sancho would very often sort of grab the ball and try and suck a fullback out, and he then go, oh God, there's no overlapping run. This is why most of the time when we've seen Sancho in a Manchester United shirt, he has played on the left-hand side because he's playing in front of Luke Shaw or other fullbacks who are slightly more aggressive as well. So the issue for Sancho is, even when it's water under the bridge with him and Erik ten Hag, he doesn't necessarily fit into the best 11 due to the way he wants to play football. And that way, I think there's perhaps only really a handful of clubs that can accommodate a talent like that and already have the fullbacks and the other personnel to accommodate that. Chelsea, in theory, should be one, if only because Chelsea have a number of players. So if you're looking, I'm sure if Enzo's looking through his cabinet for an overlapping right back, he's like, oh, I've got 2 of them. One of them is injured, but I've got at least one of them. Or if he's looking for someone to play as the number 10, so Sancho can do loads of 1-2 passes and get in and stretch defences. He's got a myriad of players who can play at that number 10 position as well. So Sancho, in theory, on paper, can work in that Chelsea squad. I think he can also, in theory, on paper, work in Juventus' squad. And in theory, on paper, might be able to work in PSG squad as well. Again, these are all theoretical. And one of the things about Jaden Sancho is the player he is on paper and the player he comes up in the numbers doesn't always translate to the player he is in real life. He sometimes strikes me as a player who needs 3 or 4 things to be in a very precise manner for him to perform at his absolute maximum. Now, Sterling is a very interesting one because I think something that's been overlooked when we discuss Raheem Sterling is this is not the Raheem Sterling of 2019. Raheem Sterling, for the majority of his Liverpool career, and the majority of his Manchester City career, was incredibly dangerous when running in behind defences. And you know that Manchester City goal they do, where they sort of drag it back, pass it out
When
to
he
the
pulls
wing.
out,
that pull back cross.
post.
There you
straight
go.
in the
That
yeah,
one.
we know it. We know it.
The triple tap goal.
Yeah.
That goal. They do all the time. Sterling was fantastic at getting on the end of that goal, running in behind defences and making sure he was in the correct position there. But Sterling at Chelsea, and this was perhaps more in his first season there, he was receiving to feet a lot more rather than running in behind defences. And I don't know why that's happening. This could be just age or footballing age, because while he's not that old, and he stresses he's not that old in terms of physical age, in terms of miles on the clock.
He's played a lot of football, hasn't he?
He's played a tremendous amount of football for club and country. And I believe someone said, footballing wise, he's closer to being in his mid-30s.
Yeah,
as well.
35 years old, I think, average.
Yeah,
35
yeah. I think one thing
we've
we've often said is when a football player hits 400 senior appearances, that's when the physical decline may begin to start. I'm not saying Sterling's entering his physical decline. I'm just saying Sterling's not the football player that thrilled in the pre-pandemic seasons for Manchester City. And the fact that he wants to receive defeat more now means I'm hesitant to say he fits at Manchester United, because Manchester United have a bevy of players who like to receive defeat, and what they need is more players who can run in behind defences. So Sterling, perhaps not. Sterling at Man United, perhaps not. Doesn't make as much sense as Sancho at Chelsea. But again, all of this is theoretical, and there could easily be a day where Sterling rocks up at Carrington and goes, right then, boys, near post, please.
David, Carl's just spoken about Sancho and Sterling, and it is a tricky one, isn't it? How does Manchester United and how do Chelsea solve a problem like Sancho and Sterling? Because these are experienced players and you can see them fitting in quite well into various clubs across Europe.
Yeah, definitely. And this suggestion of a swap is maybe more logic and speculation at this point. I'm not sort of dismissing the reports. I fully respect those that are suggesting this, but it's extremely complex as an idea, and there's no guarantee it will happen. I think Manchester United maybe is a club that Raheem Sterling would strongly consider. I think there have been some quotes on from him in the past saying that he was a Manchester United supporter. If Jaden Sancho was to leave, then Chelsea is a club that may be a destination that would appeal to him. They've inquired to his representatives, and so there is something there. So I just wanted to sort of touch upon that at the moment initially. In terms of where things go from here, there are going to be other interested parties. People have said that somewhere like an Arsenal will hold appeal to someone like Sterling. He knows Mikel Arteta really well. He will see a club in London, great stability, progress in recent times. They're looking for a wide player. Again, a lot of logic there, but I'm not suggesting that this is something that's developing at this point in time. I don't have information to suggest it is. And Mikel Arteta himself spoke about it heading into, I think it was the Aston Villa match, and kind of played it down for the time being. Let's see, you never know in these days. You've got a club like Juventus who are looking for a wide player, it would seem, and both Sterling and Sancho have been linked to them. And there will be other possibilities as well. It's also plausible that both of them stay where they are. Raheem Sterling's priority before dealing with who he might like to join is, what am I going to do about my contract at Chelsea? It has 3 years left to run. He gets paid in excess of £300,000 a week. It was Chelsea's decision to make him surplus to requirements and decide that he was not part of their plans. They took his shirt number off of him, and it was mutually decided that he would train away from the club last week. So he's kind of looking at it and saying, this wasn't my doing. and we need to have a conversation about how we sort this contract out before I then move on to the next step. And I don't want to predict a move for him until we know what's going to happen in relation to Chelsea. We've seen players in the past who haven't formed an agreement in this sort of situation, and then they stay. Maybe it gets revisited in January, the following summer, or maybe even earlier with the termination. I'm not saying that in the case of Sterling. I'm saying that has happened in other instances. Similar with Jaden Sancho, Manchester United would prefer a sale before the deadline. They might not be able to do a sale. Who's prepared to pay the transfer fee and the salary? And I just want to point out on both of them, let's not disrespect these boys. Perhaps they will move and take a lower salary if they can get their agreements right with their existing clubs. We're preempting in a lot of these things. He has to be paid 325 grand a week plus. Maybe not. Maybe he comes to an agreement in Sterling's case with Chelsea, and then a new agreement with another club on a completely different salary. So that's just one thing to bear in mind. But yeah, Manchester United, if they can't do a permanent exit for Sancho, will definitely look to do a loan. I do expect a move before the deadline, but again, it needs to be right. We thought not long ago that all had been patched up between him and Erik ten Hag, and that he was going to be reintegrated. He played a part in the second half of the season for Borussia Dortmund, involved in the Champions League final, and could this be, a second wind at Manchester United? It seems not, and so loads of possibilities open now, but nothing guaranteed at this point. These are two themes, and that's why I pointed them out in our one to watch in the Athletic transfer deal sheet that was published on the morning we record this, as two of the main ones we need to keep an eye on, because they could go either way or in any direction ahead of that Friday deadline.
Okay, let's go back to Chelsea, because I think many football fans widely understand this is a huge squad, 40 plus players, and about half of them are training separately. And some of those players that are looking to be offloaded, Romelu Lukaku, Kepa Arrizabalaga, Ben Chilwell. We've talked about Raheem Sterling, Trevor Chalobah, Petrovic. I mean, the list goes on, David. My thing to you is, I'm looking at this, and because it's so public as well, does it, from your perspective, sort of ruin the bargaining power when teams know certain players are surplus to requirements, for instance?
Well, that's the skill of the negotiation, Io. There's, on the one hand, say Chelsea are in this position where they may look to be weak because they have players that have to go. I was being told, it may be 5 to 7 permanent or loan with obligation, which is the same thing, departures this week outside of standard loans, and that's quite extraordinary. You rarely see that in an entire window, let alone in a short number of days. But the shoe will be on the other foot. For the clubs who are trying to pounce upon this and see maybe a Chelsea as prey and a situation to capitalise on, at some point they will be the seller or the loaner. Maybe they are even now. And so it's up to those, and in this case, the ownership at Chelsea, Clearlake, Bedad Eghbali and the Todd Boehly regime, and then their sporting directors, Lawrence Stewart and Paul Winstanley, to try and strike the best deals they can. The representatives of these players too, if they want to get their players out and playing football, which is a question that, all of these players, it's a brutal industry at times, and for no fault of many of these players, they're made surplus to requirements. But, are they just going to sit around and take the money that they're contractually entitled to, or are they going to go out and play? And the agents play a really important role in trying to facilitate these transfers. So there are good deals to be had, but the clubs will fight tooth and nail, and they've got their analytics on the value, the qualities of these players, what price point they should be at, where they sit in the market relative to other players in the Premier League and elsewhere in Europe, their Premier League experience, their international experience, the need of that club that's looking at them for that player, that position, their financial capabilities. So a lot more goes into this, and clearly it's not ideal for Chelsea to have this sort of bloated squad. But Enzo Maresca has been talking about, the actual group he's working with is much tighter than the sort of
he said he's working with 25. He said he's working with 25 players already, which is par of the course for many a Premier League manager. I know some managers prefer even smaller ones, but he said even though you can say there are 40 players at the squad, he is working with 25, and he only considers there to be 25. Now that does put someone like Ben Chilwell in a unusual, I won't call it awkward. Ben Chilwell's in an unusual position because everyone knows he probably is not in that 25. Everyone knows Romelu Lukaku is not in that 25. So if he wants to play football between now and January, other than reserve team football, shall we say, he has to get a move on. That doesn't necessarily make him a distressed asset, and it doesn't necessarily make Chelsea a distressed buyer. I think we can confuse the fact that Chelsea are being busy with the fact that Chelsea are doing something bad, and many a football fan has gone, what are they doing to Chelsea? And this is largely unprecedented, as David said. 7 permanent signings or loans with a view of a permanent signing in 1 week is not something you see too much. However, when you are Chelsea and you have a player of the comparable quality of Ben Chilwell, England international, someone who featured in the Champions League final in the victory over Manchester City, you should be, if you're a good negotiator and you're a good agent, you should be able to find him a suitor within a week, regardless of perhaps worries over his injuries and whatnot. And I think this is the curious thing about Chelsea is, yes, they do have a large amount of players that aren't in Enzo Maresca's plans, but a lot of those players are very good and can do multiple.
They're really good.
A lot of those players are very good, and a lot of those players can do quite a bit of good for teams that might even consider themselves rivals to Chelsea. And I think that's the curious thing. And I think that maybe gives Chelsea an advantage as well. It's not quite a fire sale. It's not quite a gentleman selling their PlayStation 4 to CEX. But yeah, they'll have a lot of people knocking on their door this week.
Yeah, for sure. David, just to wrap this up, Arrizabalaga, we've heard reports about Bournemouth for him. And also, I guess, in the striking department, what are they doing with Romelu Lukaku, and is Victor Osimhen potentially coming from Napoli? Any word for those Chelsea fans who are holding their breath?
Well, famous last words, but it seems that the heavy lifting is now done on Romelu Lukaku. I haven't been completely across this in the midst of all the madness, but reports suggest that it's going to happen to Napoli. I don't know if Chelsea got the exact fee that they were looking for. Initially, there was a release clause in his contract of like £36 million or something. But to shift him, despite the expense that the previous regime committed to him a few years ago, I guess you could say is an achievement of sorts, and we expect that to go through. Victor Osimhen is one we're going to have to watch right up until that deadline because we know of Chelsea's interest. We've reported on it. It sort of started as them wanting to do a loan. Let's see if that has to change, if they are going to do it. It'd be remarkable to see Victor Osimhen, a player of his caliber, leave on loan, but you don't know with some of these things. Firstly, his stock has fallen a bit. Secondly, options, obligations, or thirdly, permanent deal. Can that happen? Fourthly, it doesn't happen at all. He stays or goes elsewhere. I think he has to move by the sounds of it. Paris Saint-Germain have been credited with an interest for months. I reported on that in the aftermath of Kylian Mbappe announcing that he would be leaving PSG, and that was a strong option for the French champions, but I don't know if they're going to pursue it any further. Al Ahly in the Saudi Pro League have been credited with a pursuit of sorts. I don't know exactly how accurate that is or if it's going to develop, and reports suggest that the player doesn't want to make the move, or at least hasn't committed. So that would put the ball in the court of somebody like Chelsea, unless others come to the party. Chelsea are looking for a number 9 or a versatile attacker, and that's when maybe a Sancho comes into the picture as well. They've looked at multiple names over the summer, and we've reported many of them. I remember they spoke to the representatives of Jonathan David. Others have linked them to Dominic Calvert-Lewin, Tammy Abraham, and so on. I don't see Tammy Abraham returning to Chelsea, but let's see how the final days shake up. There is so much that needs to happen at Chelsea and elsewhere, of course. It's plausible that if the numbers are right for Crystal Palace that they will sell Marc Guehi as well. The asking price, we think, is £65 million plus 5 million in add-ons. Newcastle, the last we knew, were at 60 plus 5 million in add-ons, so that would make a £5 million difference. If Newcastle make up the gap, if Crystal Palace come down at all, if there is a compromise reached, then we could see that, and I don't like to say this for Crystal Palace fans who don't want it, that they lose both of their starting centre-halves in the same summer. At the time of recording, we're not there yet. There are some rumblings, some reports overnight that it's closer than ever to an agreement. I don't have that information. We'll have to wait and see. These things can change so quickly in any direction. Crystal Palace could back out, of course, and just say, no, he's not for sale, we're not accepting. It could go forward. They could bring in replacements. Their sporting director, Dougie Freedman, chairman, co-owner, Steve Parish, have always shown themselves to be pretty smart in the market. They're in talks with Wolfsburg, it seems, for Maxime Lacroix. There's constant speculation about a loan move for Trevor Chalobah, and various other options across the market. And if they lose two, I would actually back them to bring in a couple and continue to do okay, if not do well. They've got existing options there, the likes of Richards and others. They've brought in another player whose name escapes me already this summer for that position. So I don't think there would be panic there. If they don't let Marc Guehi go, it's a big risk on behalf of the club. They'll feel it would be justified, of course, and I fully respect them on that. But to be offered this sort of money for a player inside the final 2 years of his contract, who doesn't seem to be signing a new deal as things stand, they're never going to get offered that sort of money again, of course, if he goes down to the final year. He then may even decide to stay one more and go as a free agent. He's not played European football. He's just broken into the England squad. Really impressive. But there are many who feel that, they should bite Newcastle's hand off for this money. However, Crystal Palace have their own ambitions, and I fully respect that. So this is just not closed. I don't think the most recent offer was replied to in terms of accepted or rejected. And so definitely one that is going to keep us busy in these hours ahead.
David, it sounds like you've mentioned a bunch of very hard negotiators here. So you've talked about Napoli, De Laurentiis, very hard negotiator. You've talked about Victor Osimhen, we know his agent, very hard negotiator. Talked about Manuel Ugarte, represented by George Mendes, very, very keen negotiator there. And then everyone you've discussed there with Crystal Palace, we all know they are not to be trifled with if you're going to try and undercut them. Does this make, during the final weeks of the transfer window, is this where we see some of the more personalities of these individuals come to the fore a lot more?
Yeah, almost like the sporting directors and technical directors become the sort of key players in all of this. The Arsenal fans like to say Edu is cooking,
yes,
with sort of images of him grilling meat on a barbecue. I don't know what the equivalents are for sort of Dan Ashworth, Jason Wilcox, Paul Mitchell, Lawrence Stewart, Paul Winstanley. You're right, actually. It's sort of up to ownership level where they're gaining sort of fame and infamy these days. De Laurentiis is known as somebody that you just don't want to negotiate with. You've got obviously Ineos in the game now at Manchester United, the Saudi-led ownership at Newcastle, Parish flying the flag for the British core. Well, it's not really a core anymore because they've got American co-owners at Palace, but he was a fan who rose to run the club and is doing a great job and will fight tooth and nail. If people underestimate him, they're going to be given a rude awakening. So yeah, I mean, look, it can even go geopolitical at this point. We got Manchester City with Abu Dhabi and all of their might, Saudi Arabia and Jim Ratcliffe trying to bring the homegrown. The homegrown force back to the fore at Manchester United. So these are the moments that you got to be really calm and cool. You risk paying over the odds because it's late in the day, being exploited. Be careful with your medical tests as well. Just because you need a player in, you know, it doesn't mean, and there's little time, it doesn't mean you panic and cut corners. It could be extremely costly for you. And those you kind of admire the most, even though I'm very grateful to those who leave their business late because it keeps me and us busy. But those you kind of admire the most get their houses in order and their work done early. So Tottenham have done a lot of that this summer. Daniel Levy, Johan Langer. Of course, you've got Ange Postecoglou, who seems a really involved head coach when it comes to recruitment. Aston Villa have done loads of work. I remember breaking weeks ago the story of Amadou Onana being signed out of nowhere from Everton, and seems pretty much done and dusted. Bits and bobs still to do. I think Arsenal fans are happy with their couple of signings. Calafiori, and they're now trying to just finalise the deal for Marino, which will be done. Maybe they'll do a little bit more. But it's... The transfer market is becoming bigger and more box office. Get your popcorn at the ready. Buy the window. The summer, the January, and the money's down this year, which is very interesting. PSR, lack of activity in the Saudi Pro League. It's changed a little bit in terms of what's being spent, but it hasn't in terms of the eyeballs and the insatiable appetite of the public and of us to chart what's going on and enjoy the fun and games at times. Wallow in the misery too.
Well, Friday is looming, honestly. This is where you earn your money, David. Let's go.
Damn right.
Keep your eye on all his updates across his socials. Keep your eye on the deal sheet on The Athletic as well. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. David, Carl, really appreciate it. And we'll be back tomorrow delving into the biggest story from the world of football. Thank you very much. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anka, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.